In the world of forensics, motive is usually the key to solving a crime. However, some cases remain a mystery, even when innocent lives are at stake. Modern technologies are revolutionizing the work of investigators, providing new tools to uncover old cases that once shocked entire cities with their brutality. Norma Garcia was born on November 16, 1960, in the small town of Mercedes, Texas. This small settlement of 15,000 residents is located near the Mexican border. Typical of rural America, Mercedes had a tight-knit community where 75% of the population worked in the agricultural sector, and 90% were Spanish-speaking, including Norma's family. The girl grew up in a large family with 6 brothers and sisters, with whom she had close relationships. Norma stood out from others with her quiet demeanor and shyness, never causing any trouble. When Norma was about 12 years old, the family moved to California, settling on the outskirts of Oxnard, a city with a population of 200,000. This was a significant step for the Garcia family, especially for the children who were used to the sparsely populated Texas. The rhythm of life in Oxnard was strikingly different from their previous place of residence. Norma was most enchanted by the picturesque beaches and stunning sunsets, which she fell in love with wholeheartedly. After graduating from high school in 1980, the girl enrolled in a local college, not wanting to move away from her family. There she met Anthony Rodriguez, a sophomore who became her first true love. After nearly 2 years of dating, on March 6, 1982, 21-year-old Norma and Anthony got married. This was the first step towards creating the family Norma had dreamed of. That same year, the couple had their firstborn, Andrew, and in 1989, their second son, Austin. The Rodriguez family embodied Norma's ideal of family life. Understanding the importance of education for her children's future, the young mother took a job as an assistant manager at a local supermarket. However, despite her efforts, in 1991, the marriage began to fall apart. The couple often argued, and Anthony was increasingly absent due to work in other cities. Norma complained to her childhood friend Teresa about her husband's alcoholism, which led to violence against her and their older son. Not wanting to become a single mother, but understanding the danger of living with an aggressive man, Norma and the children moved to a duplex 10 minutes away from Anthony's house. She didn't file for divorce, trying to maintain the relationship for the sake of the children. The duplex was located in the neighboring town of Port Hueneme, with a population of about 20,000, mostly workers from local farms. Norma was particularly attracted to the local park, where she loved to walk with her children in her free time. Neighbors described Norma as friendly but reserved. She devoted herself entirely to her sons, not missing a single school game and spending all weekends with them. This period was difficult for Norma. She worked a lot, including overtime hours, striving to secure a future for her children. Tired, she found solace in communicating with her sons, always hoping for the best. No one could predict what fate awaited Norma. By March 1993, when she turned 32, she began dating a mechanic named Daniel. He was also a coach in the children's league where 11-year-old Andrew played. The couple met at a party, feeling an instant connection. Norma and Daniel had a great time together, walking in the park, often in the company of her sons, with whom Daniel quickly found common ground. Norma's friends and family described this relationship as long awaited for her. It seemed she had finally found happiness after the painful separation from her husband. However, despite the apparent idyll, around the middle of that year, Daniel suddenly announced the end of their relationship. This came as a painful blow to Norma, who saw no preconditions for such a turn of events. Daniel explained his decision by his desire to rekindle his relationship with his ex-girlfriend. This news deeply affected Norma, but she found the strength to move on. To distract herself from negative emotions, she decided to host a barbecue at her home on Saturday, May 29, 1993. She invited her sisters and her friend Beatrice to this event. After a busy weekend, Norma decided to spend Sunday, May 30th, in a calm atmosphere. She dedicated this day to her 4-year-old son Austin, mostly watching TV with him. The older son, Andrew, was visiting his father Anthony in Oxnard and was supposed to return the next day. On the evening of May 30th, Norma received a call from her friend Beatrice, suggesting they spend the next day at the beach. Having no other plans, Norma agreed, hoping it would help her distract from thoughts about her recent breakup. Nothing foreshadowed the tragedy that was about to unfold. On June 1st, at 7:47 in the morning, an alarming call came to the 911 emergency service of Port Hueneme. The caller was Anthony Rodriguez, a 33-year-old man who reported finding his ex-wife dead in her house. Law enforcement immediately responded to the call, which was unusual for a city where no murders had occurred in the past 3 years. Arriving at the scene, detectives found Anthony, his cousin Hector, and Norma's 2 sons waiting in the driveway. Inside the house, investigators were met with a gruesome and strange scene. In the living room, on the floor, lay 32-year-old Norma with no visible injuries or traces of blood. Instead, her head was tightly wrapped in silver-reinforced duct tape, resembling a mummy. The layer of tape was so thick that it had to be cut off. It was noticeable that someone had tried to remove part of the tape around the nose and mouth area, but unsuccessfully. The medical examiner determined that Norma had died more than a day ago, as evidenced by clear signs of rigor mortis. The victim's unbuttoned shorts suggested possible rape, but a definitive conclusion could only be made by the medical examiner after the autopsy. Detectives immediately suspected that the killer might have been familiar to the victim, as her face was completely covered with opaque tape. Perhaps this was done to prevent her from recognizing the attacker. No signs of struggle or break-in were found at the crime scene, nor was there a single drop of blood. Only a set of house keys was lying on the floor next to the body. Valuable items remained in the house, which apparently did not interest the criminal. The local police department, consisting of only 20 employees, threw all its forces into the investigation. Given the rarity of such crimes in the city and the obvious peculiarities of the case, experts from neighboring cities were brought in. Forensic experts thoroughly examined the site of the probable murder, but found nothing substantial for the investigation. In the evening of the same day, the victim's sister, Auralia, arrived at the house. They had planned to go shopping together, and Auralia had been unsuccessfully trying to contact Norma since early morning. Concerned by the lack of response, the young woman decided to check what had happened. She was shocked to see yellow tape already cordoning off the crime scene. The new witness willingly spoke with the police. According to Auralia, Norma had a tense relationship with her ex-husband, but she had no other ill-wishers. Investigators immediately took note of this information, knowing that Anthony was the one who reported the crime and was likely the last person to see Norma alive, not counting the children. All adults were taken to the station for questioning. Anthony Rodriguez behaved like a man stricken with grief. Despite the fact that they had separated long before these events, it seemed that he still loved this woman. He had no ideas about who could have attacked the defenseless victim. The man said that on June 1st, he arrived at his ex-wife's duplex around 7:30 in the morning, as they had previously agreed. The father was supposed to take the sons to school and kindergarten. This was the parenting schedule of the former couple, which they decided to maintain even after the separation. Anthony arrived with his brother Hector, who waited outside in the pickup truck while the father was going to pick up the children. He knocked, but no one answered. According to Anthony, the house was too quiet, and no one responded to his calls. The man became worried. He feared that something bad might have happened, but he didn't have his own key, so he couldn't get inside. Then he used his bank card, sliding it into the gap between the door and the wall, which allowed him to open the lock. Entering the house, Anthony again received no response to his calls. In the living room, he found his ex-wife showing no signs of life. He noticed that her head was wrapped, and the top part of her shorts was unbuttoned. Overcome with anxiety, Anthony ran outside and called for his brother Hector. When the men returned to the house, the children had already woken up from the noise. They also ended up in the living room and saw their mother motionless. They were immediately sent to their rooms. Seeing the situation, Hector touched the body. It seemed to him that it was still warm. The man quickly retrieved scissors from the truck's first aid kit. He tried to cut the adhesive tape around the nose and mouth, hoping the victim might be able to breathe. When he managed to do this, he realized that Norma wasn't breathing. No pulse could be felt. Norma was already dead. The detectives found these testimonies strange, as by that time the body had already begun to stiffen. Norma had died much earlier. Hector couldn't have felt any warmth. But the man explained this by his state of shock and fear. Despite such behavior seeming natural, the brothers destroyed much evidence and contaminated what remained with their fingerprints, shoe prints, and DNA samples. Law enforcement quickly determined that the ex-husband might even have had a motive. He was having a hard time dealing with the breakup and was extremely dissatisfied with her relationship with the new boyfriend. Moreover, they could have had disagreements about custody and alimony, as the children remained with their mother. According to Anthony, they had separated from his wife several years before these events, but officially, they were still not divorced. The couple maintained normal relations to set a healthy example for their sons. From the man's account, all of this seemed quite normal. However, the victim's family provided the detectives with more troubling information. Norma's sisters said that the woman was very dissatisfied with Anthony's regular visits and his persistent desire to control her. He explained this by his desire to constantly see and communicate with the children. But in the opinion of the murdered woman's relatives, the ex-husband was imposing himself specifically in the hope of rekindling the relationship. He repeatedly suggested that Norma meet and spend time together, go somewhere. But all this caused her displeasure and provoked arguments. Eventually, Hector and Anthony were asked to take a polygraph test. They agreed and passed this task without problems. The detectives were initially convinced that the men were involved in what had happened. But after the lie detector test, they were forced to let them go. Both were not written off as potential suspects. But the investigation focused on other people from the deceased's close circle. After the autopsy, the medical examiner was able to establish that there had been no rape, despite the woman's clothes being unbuttoned. Perhaps this was done to mislead. Her head was wrapped with tape 14 times. Almost the entire roll was used to mummify the victim. Cuts were found on her tongue, left from accidentally biting her tongue during this process. However, the cause of death was manual strangulation. The head was wrapped later, when she was already dead. This was the conclusion reached by the medical examiner. Then a question arose. Why use tape at all, let alone wrap the head so many times? The time frames were clarified. She was killed between 10:30 on Sunday, May 30th, and 5 o'clock in the morning on May 31st. Obviously, the younger son, Austin, had been in the house with his mother's body for at least 24 hours. The 4-year-old child had been walking around Norma all this time. Likely, he was the only person who could have witnessed what happened. Forensic experts collected materials from under the victim's nails, as well as from the adhesive tape. It was assumed that traces of the killer could have been left on all of this. Unfortunately, the level of technology in the 90s did not allow for a full DNA analysis. All collected physical evidence was preserved, but at that time they could not provide any valuable information. Nevertheless, the detectives managed to uncover some details. They were sure that the criminal knew his victim closely, and by wrapping tape around her head posthumously, he was trying to psychologically distance himself from what he had done. It was decided to talk to the woman's children. According to the older son Andrew, when his father brought him home on the evening of the 31st, he also couldn't get his mother to answer. But the boy noticed that the window was open enough for him to sneak into the house. It was very late, and he was surprised that the younger son Austin was still awake. He asked what the reason was. His brother replied that their mother was sick and had a bandage on her head, so he was waiting for her to get better. The older brother didn't understand what Austin meant. Andrew assumed that their mother was just resting, as she often fell asleep in the living room. He put his brother to bed and went to sleep himself, not wanting to disturb the tired woman. At first, it seemed that talking to a 4-year-old child wouldn't provide valuable information. However, to the investigators' surprise, Austin provided many details. He spoke with detectives in the presence of a child psychologist. According to the boy, on the evening of the 31st, his mother let a dark-skinned man into the house who called himself Corey. Almost immediately, an argument broke out between them. Austin claimed that he saw with his own eyes how the stranger attacked his mother and wrapped her head with adhesive tape. After that, Corey fled, but little Austin allegedly chased him even onto the street, running several dozen yards from the house. Realizing he couldn't catch up with his mother's attacker, he returned home and closed the door. This story didn't sound entirely plausible, especially regarding the chase after the criminal. 10 days later, Austin provided new information. Now he claimed that a light-skinned man named Warren entered through the kitchen door, and it was he who wrapped his mother's head with tape. This puzzled the police, as no evidence suggested that more than one person had attacked the woman. Moreover, the child radically changed his story. Eventually, this was explained by the increased attention of family members to Austin. After the murder, they talked a lot with the boy, which could have distorted his memories. Despite this, detectives quickly discovered that Corey and Warren were in the victim's immediate circle, and close ones also knew about them. Norma worked with these people and had long maintained friendly relationships with them. Warren Mackey wasn't even present at the party organized by the victim. He lived about 20 minutes' walk from her house. They often met and talked, and it was known that the man had feelings for the deceased, had asked her out several times, but was rejected. After this, he became even more persistent, often coming to Norma's house uninvited. The woman admitted that she had no romantic feelings for him, but didn't want to rudely push him away to avoid hurting him. Most witnesses described him as a calm and sweet person, but some thought he was a bit strange. Warren himself also confirmed his presence at the party organized by Norma. According to him, they talked until everyone left, then went to her house and watched TV for a while. He left for home around 10:30 in the evening, and the next day he went to meet friends in Santa Barbara. The man denied his involvement in the murder and refuted his feelings for Norma, calling their relationship purely friendly and emphasizing that he didn't seek anything more. Later, the suspect's friends confirmed his words. Corey Davis worked with Norma, unlike Warren, who was her former colleague. He denied friendship with the woman, saying they just crossed paths and communicated at work as acquaintances, and on the night of the murder, he was at home with his parents. Detectives immediately noticed that he behaved nervously during the interrogation and cooperated reluctantly, but besides this, the police noticed no alarming moments. After this, detectives continued communicating with the deceased's closest circle. Unexpectedly, her friend Beatrice reported that at the barbecue before her death, Norma complained about losing her house keys. Interestingly, they were found next to her body when the police first arrived at the call. It seemed this could be a breakthrough, and investigators decided to talk to Corey again, who aroused their suspicions and arrived at the address he provided. It turned out that he had given false information and lived elsewhere. Thus, suspicions about the dark-skinned man began to take real shape. It was decided that Corey and Warren should take a polygraph test. To the investigators' surprise, both also passed it without problems. It seemed the case was hitting a dead end. The detectives had one more person of interest on their suspect list: the woman's ex-boyfriend, named Daniel. Warren reported that shortly before the breakup, problems began in the couple. He heard about this from Norma. The boyfriend even came to the deceased's workplace once and caused a scene, so it was decided to talk to him at the station. Here, the man denied problems in the relationship, insisted that they had separated long ago and maintained a friendly connection. Now he was dating another woman and didn't care about Norma. He also denied the conflict at work. His alibi was confirmed, and Daniel successfully passed the polygraph test. Now the investigation ran out of suspects. There was nothing left but to return to the very beginning, and the police talked to the friend Beatrice again. The woman confessed that she had such a warm relationship with Norma that she became the only friend to whom Beatrice told about an affair happening behind her husband's back. Norma even allowed Beatrice to use her house so that her friend could meet this man, giving her keys for free access. At this moment, the detectives had a thought. Could Norma's best friend's husband have taken revenge on the woman for facilitating Beatrice's regular infidelities? Or could it have been the friend's lover? Suddenly, two new suspects appeared who deserved closer attention. First, investigators spoke with Beatrice's husband, but he had a confirmed alibi. In desperation, law enforcement also met with Beatrice's lover, but he was quickly crossed off the suspect list as well. The situation changed drastically when 26 days after Norma's murder, a new victim was discovered. The second deceased turned out to be Beatrice Fellis, an 87-year-old deaf-mute woman. She was found stabbed to death in her bed in a room on the third floor of a nursing home, a few blocks from Norma's residence. A month later, on August 5th, Cynthia Berger, a 44-year-old customer service manager at a local company, was found dead in a burning house. At first, firefighters were called, but upon arrival, they found her body in the bathroom. The victim had been raped, strangled, and the cause of death was smoke inhalation, as she was still alive after the torture. These events shocked the police department of the small town, where the crime rate had previously been 0. Now detectives were investigating 3 murders, suggesting a connection between them and the activity of a serial killer who urgently needed to be stopped. The investigators couldn't cope with the volume of tasks. Even the sheriff was working as a detective. Meanwhile, public pressure was mounting, with local residents organizing memorial events to draw attention to the tragedies. Given the department's lack of preparedness for such a number of crimes, an FBI agent, an expert in creating psychological profiles of criminals, was brought in to assist. Behavioral analysis indicated that the killer was very close to Norma. According to the agent, he wrapped her head with tape, not after strangulation, but before it, to depersonalize the victim and suppress feelings that could have interfered with carrying out the plan. Almost 18 months later, by November 1995, information was received about a man suspected of killing at least 5 women across the United States. He turned out to be 33-year-old Glenn Edward Rogers, and previous episodes of his criminal activity resembled the cases in the town. Glenn was known as the Casanova Killer. He was found guilty of first-degree murder of 2 women, the first in Florida in 1997, the second in California in June 1999. After his arrest, Glenn initially told police that he had committed about 70 murders and was in California during Norma's murder. Later, he retracted this confession. Glenn is a suspect in many other similar murders across the United States, but there is no evidence in these cases. He was sentenced to death in Florida and California. Since 1997, he has been on death row in Florida, awaiting execution. However, DNA test results excluded Glenn from the list of suspects. Nevertheless, after the death of the third victim, the bloody events in Port Hueneme ceased. The situation fundamentally changed only in 2000 with the emergence of innovative technologies in forensics. Now old evidence could be evaluated in a new light. Long-forgotten crimes began to be pulled from the archives. By 2002, after completing the analysis of collected DNA, no matches were found in the police database. However, by 2003, after repeated analyses, forensic experts managed to find a match. The DNA found under the deceased's fingernails belonged to 39-year-old Warren Mackey. This was the same former colleague of Norma who had courted her. Now everything came together at one point. Despite the fact that the man managed to fool the polygraph, usually only the most hardened sociopaths, who feel no emotions or remorse, are capable of this. He also lied about his plans for the evening after the murder, persuading friends to confirm a fabricated alibi. Investigators were amazed at how skillfully Warren managed to deceive everyone. He was the most inconspicuous suspect, whom no one could have thought of. Despite all this, the evidence in the form of DNA testing proved irrefutable. Warren's DNA samples were found on the ends of the tape discovered on the victim's face. On August 27, 2003, the killer was apprehended. During interrogation, he was given one last chance to confess. However, Warren still insisted on his version and soon refused to cooperate with the investigation, demanding a lawyer. The man was arrested and charged with murder. Preliminary hearings took place on March 2, 2004. The prosecution was still hesitant about whether to consider this case as first or second-degree murder. The situation was resolved on January 10, 2005, when Warren agreed to a plea deal and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. However, the man refused to give any explanations for his brutal act. According to him, he was under the influence of alcohol and drugs, so he couldn't accurately remember what happened that evening. 41-year-old Warren Mackey was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 15 years. As part of the deal, he was prohibited from filing appeals. Of course, he began requesting parole as soon as he served the required minimum, but all his requests were rejected, in part thanks to the active participation of Norma's murdered relatives. Regarding the other two murders that shook the city, both criminals were found, and they were not connected to Norma. Warren Mackey is still in prison. He will get his next chance for early release in August 2028. The victim's family has stated that they will do everything in their power to prevent his release. So far, the killer has been denied. This is likely to happen in the next attempt as well. This story demonstrates how technological progress in forensics can solve crimes that remained unsolved for many years. The murder of Norma Garcia, which initially seemed an unsolvable mystery, was eventually solved thanks to DNA analysis. This case underscores the importance of preserving evidence and reanalyzing it using new methods. The story also shows how often criminals can be people we least suspect. Warren Mackey, seemingly an ordinary colleague and friend, turned out to be a cold-blooded killer. This reminds us of the need to be vigilant and careful in our relationships. Finally, this case demonstrates the unwavering determination of the victim's family in seeking justice, even years after the crime. Their resolve to prevent Mackey's parole is a powerful example of how love and memory of the deceased can continue to influence the course of justice. If you found this story interesting and want to learn more about similar criminal cases, don't forget to subscribe to the Detective Brooks channel. There you'll find even more fascinating investigations, analysis of criminal cases, and interesting facts from the world of forensics. Subscribe so you don't miss new exciting stories.